They are, I mean, they epitomise the open ocean, don't they? They're the biggest wingspan of any bird. The wanderer can be almost 4 meters from wingtip to wingtip, and they fly literally millions of miles in their lifetime. They just soar across the waves, just barely brushing the surface at times. They're just absolutely immaculate to watch. But some of the populations are being affected by climate change. For example, there's on Bird Island, in South Georgia, it can be very, very windy there. And the wind sort of can blow sometimes, can actually blow the young chicks off the nest. And it's funny, but the adults don't seem to recognize the chicks once they've been gone a certain distance from the nest. So if a chick is blown off the nest, then the adult, when it returns, doesn't really recognize where the chick is, and it just abandons it, and that's it. In a sort of indirect way, albatross fly a long way foraging for their food. They can fly 1,000, 1,500 miles looking for food. Now, that food that they're looking for often brings them in contact with trawlers, with fishing boats, which are fishing for krill and other stuff around the Antarctic. And these boats are often, sometimes the boats are trawling for, sometimes the boats are fishing for deep water fish. So they put out these long lines and they bait these long lines with squid. And one of the big problems for albatross is that they tend to, as the line goes off the back of the fish, the albatross will dive down and try to take the bait off the hook. Sometimes they take in the hook as well, and the albatross gets dragged underwater and drowned. So longline fisheries are responsible for quite a large number of albatross deaths every year. And of course, with climate change too, as I've mentioned, the distribution of food can vary, and even for a bird that can fly a long way looking for food like the albatross, if where that animal finds food, if that distribution pattern changes, then that may mean that some seasons are less successful than they have been in terms of the amount of food that the albatross can find and the amount of food it can take back to its chicks. So albatross populations are in some danger in some places from longline fishing and from the sort of secondary effects of climate change.
Yeah, I had no idea about the fishing. That's crazy. So obviously there's no laws against it.
Yeah, well, there have been some techniques introduced, hooks where the albatross can, well, I think one of the main things the longline fishermen have done is they have a new system to basically get their hook with the bait on it, get that underwater sooner rather than trailing it out at the back of the boat and just letting it sink more slowly. They are looking at ways to get it down underwater, out of range of the albatross sooner. But there's no doubt for things like black-browed albatross on the Falkland Islands, for example, where there's a lot of squid fishing going on and a lot of longline fishing going on, that the loss of black-browed albatrosses around there and off South Georgia has been significant over the last 15 years or so.
Yeah, wow, because obviously then they won't get back to feed their young and then...
Well, they just, as I say, the albatross fly around, they can see the bait going down on the hooks. What they see is a potential meal, and they come down and they'll land on the water and peck at the pieces of squid which are being used as bait. And by doing that, many of them get snagged by the actual hook itself. And as the long line goes down and gets dragged underwater, the albatross will do too. Albatross can't dive very deep. It's amazing. Some of them feed almost exclusively on squid, but an albatross can't go deeper in the water than basically it ducks its head. It spreads its wings, flips its tail up, and does a quick dive down. So basically it can't feed probably deeper than half a meter, maybe a meter at most under the surface. And yet some of them feed almost exclusively on squid at night. So we have very little idea how they find these aggregations of squid. It's possible that they can actually smell them. You know, when you get that amount of food next to the surface, whether it be krill or fish or squid, then there is a certain amount of them come close to the surface and some of their smell comes out into the air and then travels in the air. And it's possible that the albatross can detect where those big prey concentrations are. But it's certainly remarkable. It's one of the things that I'd like to film would be albatross feeding on squid naturally at night. That would be another big unfilmed sequence.
So when are you playing that one?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, for all I know, somebody's maybe trying at the moment. One of the nicest little sequences that I did was I went to a place called Bird Island off South Georgia for Blue Planet, and they wanted to get an albatross chick, a newly hatched albatross chick, being fed for the very first time. So I had to spend my time sitting very nice and quietly, maybe 5-6 meters from an albatross nest. And they make these big nests, which are sort of like piles of feathers and various things. They make them up and they sit on top of them. And for the first few days after the egg hatches, you just don't see the chick at all. It just sits underneath its parent. And then eventually you'll hear this faint cheeping and a sort of wobbly head comes out, and then the big head comes down, and the parent opens its mouth, and then the young chick goes inside like this. So it took about 3 or 4 days just watching this chick for it to come out for the first time. But it was a lovely, gentle sequence. You know, all too often we're asked to film something attacking another thing, you know, all blood and, you know, all tooth and claws. So it was nice to film something a bit quieter.